There's this moment, a very quiet one, when you realize you've been performing in someone else's circus. Maybe you didn't even know you were on stage. You thought you were in a relationship, a friendship, a team, a family. But somewhere along the line, it shifted. And now every time you're around this person, you feel smaller. You're explaining yourself too much, apologizing for things that aren't your fault, editing your personality to keep the peace. And it's exhausting. That's the thing about toxic people. They don't just take up space in your life. They rent out a whole floor in your mind and redecorate it with self-doubt. So what do? Most of us try to negotiate. We try to explain. We try to fix it. We write long texts. We have difficult conversations. We set soft boundaries and hope they're respected. But let me be clear. Toxic people are not confused. They are not misunderstood. They are calculating. They know exactly what they're doing. They just don't care. And the longer you stay to convince them of your worth, the more they convince you that you don't have any. Now, here's the part that sounds harsh until it sets you free. You don't owe them anything. You don't owe them closure. You don't owe them understanding. You don't even owe them a warning. The most powerful decision you will ever make is the one where you say absolutely nothing and just walk away. I call it the clean exit. No drama, no final speech, no attempt to educate them on their behavior, because here's the truth. Toxic people don't grow when you tell them about themselves. They grow when they lose access to you. The moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment you reclaim your power. It's the psychological equivalent of unplugging your energy from their grid. And it's terrifying at first, because we've been conditioned to believe that if we're not nice, if we're not forgiving, if we don't give second, third, and 15th chances, we're somehow failing as human beings. But let me ask you this. How many more times are you going to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm? How many more times are you going to dim your light because it makes them squint? There's this fear that if we just walk away, we'll be seen as cold or heartless. But let me reframe that. What if walking away is actually the most loving thing you can do for yourself? What if preserving your peace is more important than preserving the image of being the bigger person? Because here's the kicker. Toxic people count on your empathy. They weaponize your kindness. They manipulate your morals, and they know that as long as they can make you feel guilty, they can keep you on the hook. So you have to do the one thing they're not prepared for. Disappear. Not with bitterness, not with revenge, just absence. Quiet, unshakable, unbothered absence. No fireworks, no confrontation, just a final, definitive, private decision. And when they try to bait you back in, because trust me, they will, when they send that, hey, just checking in text, when they try to act like nothing happened, when they test the waters to see if you'll let them back in, you don't engage. Not because you're angry, but because you're free. You have to understand, toxic people don't fear confrontation. They feed off it. What they hate is indifference. They hate when you stop responding. They hate when your world keeps spinning without them. They hate that they no longer get a front row seat to your life. That's how you win. Not by being louder, not by proving a point, but by no longer making them the point. And this isn't just about cutting someone off, it's about cutting the cord that connects your self-worth to their opinion. It's about unlearning the need for their validation. It's about realizing that no matter how much you bend over backward, toxic people will always find something wrong. So stop bending, stop shrinking, stand all the way up. And walk. Walk without turning around. Walk even when your voice trembles and your knees feel weak, because every step you take away from their chaos is a step back toward your peace. Look, the reason this is hard isn't because you're weak, it's because you're loyal, and it's because you cared. And that says a lot about you, but loyalty becomes self-betrayal when it's given to the wrong people. You were taught to ride or die, and that's noble. But not everyone is worth the ride. And some people will watch you die and call it love. That's not your tribe. That's not your future. When you finally go silent, I mean truly silent, something powerful happens. They notice. And for the first time, they feel the full weight of your absence. You stop being a character in their drama. You stop being their emotional punching bag. And they're left talking to a wall. That's when it hits them. You're not coming back. You're not playing the role anymore, and the game can't go on without you. So don't send a warning shot. Don't write a long emotional farewell. Just exit. Quietly, completely, permanently. Let them wonder. Let them spiral. Let them talk. And while they're stuck in the same toxic loop, you're out there living, growing, glowing without them. You only have to do it once, do it right, and they'll never bother you again. You want peace. You crave connection, understanding, maybe even just some basic decency. But here's what no one tells you. Peace isn't something you ask for, it's something you enforce. And that's where boundaries come in. Now, I know the word boundaries gets thrown around a lot like it's just a trendy therapy term, but let me tell you, boundaries are not soft. They're not subtle. A real boundary isn't a suggestion, it's a declaration. It says, this is where I end and where you don't get to cross. Toxic people hate boundaries for one reason. They can't control you through them. The moment you set a boundary, they feel it. Not because they respect it, but because they're suddenly outside of it. And that's where they start squirming. They'll say things like, you've changed, or you're being dramatic, or don't take things so personally. And that's the test. Because what they're really saying is, how dare you not let me walk all over you like I used to? So here's the trick. You don't ask for permission to set a boundary. You don't explain it to death. You don't need a PowerPoint presentation on why you're allowed to protect your own energy. You just do it clearly, firmly, without flinching. And then, here's the part people miss. You hold the line. Because boundaries without consequences, they're just wallpaper. They might look good, but they don't actually stop anyone. Now, most people fail here, not because they're weak, but because they're conditioned to avoid conflict, conditioned to feel guilty for saying no, conditioned to believe that setting limits makes them selfish or cold or unkind. But let's clear this up. Boundaries are not about keeping people out. They're about keeping yourself intact. It's not about rejection, it's about protection. Think of it like this. Your life is a house. Boundaries are the walls, the locks, the alarm system. Toxic people, they show up, uninvited, muddy shoes and all, and demand access to every room. Then they get offended when you say, actually, the kitchen is off limits. You're not being rude, you're being responsible. You're saying, I decide who comes in and how far they're allowed to go. And when you really start holding those lines, things change. People will push back. Some will leave. Good. Let them. Because here's the reality. The people who respect your boundaries are the people who actually respect you. The ones who don't, they were only ever here for what they could take, not for who you are. Toxic people test your boundaries in subtle ways first. They'll ignore a small no and see how you react. They'll make a joke at your expense and waiting for you to laugh it off. And every time you let it slide, they take a step closer until suddenly they're making decisions in your life, speaking for you, taking from you, and convincing you it's normal. It's not, it's never been normal, but they've trained you to second guess yourself. That's why when you finally draw the line, it feels like you're being cruel. You're not. You're healing. You're rebuilding the blueprint of your self-worth. And yeah, it'll be uncomfortable at first. You'll question yourself. You'll feel like you're being too much. But let me ask you something. How much of you have you already given away to make them comfortable? There comes a moment, and it's a quiet one, when you realize that your peace costs more than their approval, that your mental health is more valuable than their validation, and that if someone gets angry when you say no, that's not a reason to say yes. That's a red flag. That's the sign you needed. You were never the problem. Your kindness just became the playground for someone else's manipulation. Now, here's what happens when you finally start setting sharp, unapologetic boundaries. You stop asking, is this okay? And start saying, this is what I will allow. You stop giving people access based on history and start giving access based on behavior. You stop keeping people in your life just because they've been there a long time and start asking, have they earned the right to stay? Because not everyone deserves front row seats to your story. Some people, they're only clapping when you're down. They're only supportive when you're small. And they'll only love you when you're easy to control. But you weren't born to be manageable. You were born to be whole. And boundaries are the blueprint for that wholeness. There's something beautiful that happens when you start honoring your limits. The right people show up. People who don't need to be convinced. People who don't see your boundaries as walls, but as doors with locks that they're willing to knock on. People who don't take your no as a challenge, but as a truth. And when those people arrive, you'll wonder why you ever let the others stay so long. But don't be surprised when the toxic ones come back for another round. They'll test the fence. They'll poke at your rules. They'll try to guilt trip you back into old patterns. And that's where your power lives, in the pause. In the moment where you used to bend, and now you don't. In the split second where you used to explain, and now you just breathe and say no. Calmly, completely, consistently. That consistency is key. Boundaries don't work just once. They're a daily decision. Every time you reinforce them, you're sending a message to the world and to yourself that you matter, that your space matters, that your mental and emotional safety is not up for negotiation. Here's the truth. You only have to do this once the right way. One solid boundary enforced like your life depends on it, because in some ways it does, and the right people step forward, while the wrong ones quietly fall away. No shouting, no drama, just clarity, peace, and power. Say it once, mean it, hold the line, and they'll never bother you again. Toxic people don't actually fear confrontation, they fear reflection. Not the kind that comes from a deep internal journey, but the kind that shows them exactly who they are. Because for most of their lives, they've surrounded themselves with people who bend, people who comply, people who cushion the blow of their own bad behavior. So when you finally hold up the mirror, not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity, they flinch, they panic, they lash out, not because you're wrong, but because you're right, and they're not ready to face it. See, the mirror isn't always something you hold up with words. Sometimes you hold it up simply by changing, by growing, by not reacting the way you used to. You used to defend yourself when they lied. Now you don't. You used to beg them to stop twisting your words. Now you walk away mid-sentence. You used to cry, now you smile. Not out of joy, but out of knowing you've seen this game before and you're not playing anymore. That's what makes toxic people uncomfortable. Not your anger, your evolution. Because every time you rise above their tactics, every time you remain calm while they try to provoke you, every time you stop engaging in the cycle, they see themselves more clearly. You're no longer validating their chaos. You're no longer a part of the pattern that makes them feel powerful. You've become a reflection of everything they're trying to avoid. Truth, accountability, growth. But here's the catch. You can't stay in that reflection game for long, because after a while you realize the mirror never was. You didn't sign up to be someone's wake-up call. You didn't come here to be their lesson. You came here to live your life. And every second you spend showing them their reflection is a second you're not showing up for your own. At some point, you have to break the mirror. Not out of spite, not to hurt them, but to free yourself. Because even holding that mirror, even in silence, is a form of emotional labor. It keeps you tethered to their dysfunction. And the longer you stay tethered, the more you're still playing their game, just with different rules. The most powerful thing you can do isn't to show them who they are. It's to stop caring who they think they are. To walk away with such calm certainty that your absence becomes the only truth they can't ignore. You don't need to expose them. You don't need to prove them wrong. You don't need to gather the receipts and build a case like a lawyer in court. You just need to live fully, freely, and far from their influence. Because here's the twist. When you stop trying to hold up that mirror, the truth doesn't disappear. It follows them. It shows up in other relationships, in other conversations, in other mirrors that life inevitably places in front of them. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually they'll have to face themselves. And you won't be there when it happens. And that's the gift. You're no longer their audience. This is what toxic people fear the most. Your detachment, your indifference, your decision to no longer explain, justify, or anticipate. They can handle your rage. They can feed off your confusion. But when you're done, truly done, when you disengage without announcement, when your silence becomes the loudest thing in the room, it rattles them. Because toxic people don't want you to heal. They want you to need them. Even in pain, they want you to be tethered to the loop, always reacting, always defending, always trying to get back to the version of them you thought was real. But once you realize that version never existed, the illusion dies. And when the illusion dies, your freedom begins. That freedom is quiet. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need permission. It just shows up, steady and grounded. You start doing things you love without checking if they'll approve. You start laughing again, really laughing, the kind that comes from your belly and not your nerves. You start sleeping better, breathing deeper, moving through the world like you belong here, because you do. And the toxic person, they feel that shift. Not because you're making a scene, but because your energy is no longer theirs to manage. They can sense that the tether is gone, that you've stopped seeing them as the center of the story, that you've reclaimed your narrative. It's a powerful thing to stop performing, to stop trying to fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed, to stop arguing with someone who only hears themselves, to stop carrying mirrors for people who refuse to look. You break the mirror not because it failed to work, but because it was never your job to hold it in the first place. Let them find their own reflection. in their own time with their own consequences. You've got a life to build, a real one where your peace isn't dependent on someone else's chaos, one where your worth isn't measured by how much abuse you can endure, one where you no longer have to prove you're good by staying loyal to people who aren't. And when they come back, because they always do, when they test the waters, when they ask how you've been, when they act like nothing happened, you won't be angry. You'll just be unavailable. You'll be unreachable in the best possible way. Not because you disappeared, but because you finally arrived. Fully, completely as yourself. You mirrored their energy, and then you broke the mirror. And that's the moment they lost access to you forever. Here's a hard truth. Toxic people can only control you as long as you're still tied to their drama. The moment you cut that cord, the moment you stop looking back, you'll notice something profound. The weight lifts. You stop carrying their negativity, their chaos, their constant emotional demands. You stop being the emotional support they never asked for. And while they try to pull you back in, you do something unexpected. You thrive, you grow, you glow, so loudly, in fact, that your absence echoes through every room they thought they still had access to. When you let go, it's not just about walking away from a person. It's about walking into your own potential, your own power, and your own life, unapologetically. And that's the part they never saw coming. You weren't supposed to get better without them. You weren't supposed to keep going without their toxic influence. They built themselves into your narrative so seamlessly that they thought they were irreplaceable. But what they didn't realize was that the only thing they were doing was keeping you from seeing your own strength. Now, here's a funny thing about people who try to control you. They don't really know you. They don't know who you are without them. They don't know what you're capable of without their approval or constant validation. And when you start thriving without them, that's when they start feeling the most threatened. They didn't just lose you, they lost access to everything you could have become. They thought they could hold you back forever. And instead, you just took off. That's where the real power lies, in your elevation. It's not about throwing it in their face. It's not about rubbing their nose in how much better your life is without them. It's about the fact that you don't need to. You don't need to engage in petty games. You don't need to prove a point. You just live. And as you live, you glow. And that glow is impossible to ignore. They'll feel the heat, and they won't know what hit them. They will try to come back. You can count on it. It's almost predictable. Once you step out of their shadow and start becoming the person they never wanted you to be, they'll reach out in whatever way they can, a text here, a casual comment there. They'll try to test the waters. They'll want to see if you're still available for their drama. They'll ask, still desperate for their approval, still willing to let them control your emotions. And that's when you face the ultimate test. The real magic happens when you choose to be unavailable. Not unavailable as in you're playing some kind of mind game. Unavailable because you've stopped waiting for their validation. Unavailable because you've learned to prioritize your peace, your happiness, and your growth above their desire to keep you stuck. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's the most freeing. To simply refuse to be part of a narrative that isn't yours. To refuse to give them the time or the energy they crave. To refuse to re-enter the cycle they set up for you, because you now see it for what it is. A loop meant to keep you small. This isn't about anger. This is about resentment. It's about clarity. It's about knowing that your peace isn't for sale, and neither is your time. And here's the secret. When you make that decision, you stop waiting for someone to give you permission to live your life. You stop looking back to see if they're still watching. You stop looking for their approval, because the truth is, you don't need it. And as you live without them, as you rise higher than they ever expected, something incredible starts to happen. You realize you don't need to convince them that you're better off without them. You just are better off. They'll see it in the way you carry yourself, in the way you show up for yourself and others. They'll feel the absence of your energy, and for the first time, they'll understand what it feels like to be replaced. Not with someone else, but with your own strength, your own worth, your own presence. You didn't need their approval, you didn't need their validation, you didn't need their permission to become the person you were always meant to be. And the more you grow, the more you show the world that you are worthy. Without them, you'll see the people who genuinely care for you rise up around you. People who don't drain you. People who feed your soul, not just your ego. People who celebrate your wins, even when they're small. And those are the people who matter. The toxic ones, they'll be left watching. And it won't be the way you imagine, with them begging for forgiveness. It'll be quieter. It'll be subtler. It'll be in the way they can't keep up with you anymore. In the way they fade into the background as you walk forward, unapologetically, confidently, and completely. Because the truth is, you are always meant for bigger things. And once you let go of their toxicity, once you step out of their shadow, you shine in a way that cannot be ignored. And so let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them watch as you soar. Because that's the final part of the story, the last piece of the puzzle, the one where they see you thriving and they know it's without them. And no matter what they do to try to drag you back, you've already moved on. And that's when they realize they never had a hold on you in the first place. You glow up loud enough that your absence echoes, and from that moment on, they never bother you again.